попробуем сделать доклад действительно интересным, чтобы время прошло с пользой.
Let's try making this report interesting so that you get the most of your time. My name is Vladimir Voloshin. I work for Positive Technologies. This is Alexander Stepanov, and he is going to bear the brunt of the second part of our report. So let's get going. Our plan is to tell you about using MaxPatrol SIEM and making the most out of it. And in particular, we'll tell you about MaxPatrol SIEM Health Check.
Смотрите, вот есть набор понятий на этом слайде. Они наверняка вам знакомы, надеюсь.
So listed here are the notions I guess you'll know very well, such as, logs and dashboards and health monitoring notifications. If you have worked with MaxPatrol SIEM, or in fact most other SIEMs, you wouldn't be surprised. So, for example, I should probably comment on health monitoring notifications. With this notifications, you will learn about the current breakdowns or errors. So it's effectively a traffic light system showing the current condition of your landscape. The configuration checklist should enable you to run your system, configure your system in an optimal way. It will walk you step by step through the configuration process and will help you run your system in the way that was designed by the developer, which I guess happens to be us. There are also other things such as source monitoring, configuration files, various logs, and statistics. What they have all in common is that they're all designed to help you control the performance of your system and make sure you get the most of it. However, when you use them individually and separately, you will not be able to benefit from a holistic approach. It's important to know how to properly interpret the data the system provides. So if you apply these useful tools selectively and sparingly, you will not be able to provide a comprehensive answer to the question of whether your system is running correctly, if we experience errors, which are the most critical ones, how optimal is the current architecture of our infrastructure, given that it's natural for infrastructure to go through change. How efficient is our system? Do we really provide for proper monitoring and incident response? One may think that all these questions are kind of abstract, but in fact, SIEM is a root-level system for incident monitoring and response, which means that you need to view it comprehensively and apply all the tools provided. That's why we came up with a product called MaxPatrol SIEM Health Check. It is effectively a set of technical and organizational checks, which supports, a proper holistic checkup that should help you better withstand cyber attacks. What it includes? Well, process analysis, architecture assessment, component functional check, availability and sufficiency of resources, false positives analysis, update process overview, and connected sources monitoring.
Мы взяли все те инструменты, которые уже приходят в системе из коробки.
So we started by looking at all the tools available in the off-the-shelf solution. We didn't really add much to it, but we asked ourselves, how can our clients best use them most efficiently? We took into account the experience of the technical support division of our analysts.
Эти встроенные инструменты. Мы поняли, какие источники данных надо дергать.
We also were able to identify the sources of data that should provide the most precise answers, and we got a list of initial checks, over 100 in total, that we built into this tool, as we felt that we had to rely primarily on them to come up with a reliable answer. For a top-level assessment, and say in a top-level report, you probably will not want to see the results from each of the 120 checks. But we decided to aggregate these check results. Next, we described assessment criteria and the applicability scope. Naturally, in different infrastructures, you will need different tools, and some tools will not really be applicable. And on something that's not applicable, claiming that you have failed a particular check makes little sense. Next, we did data collection, and we did preliminary analysis of results, which showed that some checks are redundant and others are in fact extraneous. So we came up with a finalized list and we put them in good order. The idea is that the total number of sources we're tracking is obviously below 120. So in order to minimize the number of requests, we optimized the process. So we came up with the right sequence for these checks to be performed in. Naturally, we didn't want to do it all manually. That's why we developed automation scripts. And they also did some pre-processing of the results. It was also important to prioritize the results of these checks and our observations. Naturally, I'm talking about the checks that were failed by the system or those that returned issues. Naturally, some things need to be resolved as a first priority, while others can afford to wait. For every inspection item, we provided our own recommendations on what needs to be done in order to address the problem. We verified, we in fact double-checked all the data we received with our experts. And then, we processed the results, we prepared a report and a presentation. I will cover it in additional detail later, but the big idea is that there is a technical report and there is also a top-tier presentation for the executives, an executive summary, effectively. So this is what a check can return. So you see, there are fields there. So we are showing what was being checked, the name of the check, for example, component availability check, source of information. So you see that it's a particular log, health monitoring log, that we are parsing with the help of automation scripts. I'm also showing here a specific response from the system that may be a trigger. Also, we are showing here some top-level assessment criteria. In particular, here it says that the result is not okay because a particular component was not available. And the reason for that is that this particular component was not updated from version 24.0 to 24.1, and since the certificates were not compatible, we lost connection to it. As we assess the performance of the system, we try to see if the issues we have discovered can be resolved on the spot. Now, in real life, it may be different. If it's a production system, for example, or if, for example, resolution will require a lot of time or a lot of sign-offs. So this is a decision that will need to be taken separately. For each of the checks, we are identifying items like this. So what you see here is a technical draft of the report. So we're also listing the actions we've already taken to address it. A bird's eye view of it shows that out of 120 checks, or at least 120 checks, fall into the following categories: resources, architecture, monitoring, expertise, infrastructure, configuration, updates, licenses, and processes. Many categories, in fact, but assessing each of these areas indeed helps us come up with a comprehensive system assessment.
В итоге состоит продукт. Это матрица проверок и критериев оценки.
So we have, as a final product, we have a check matrix and assessment criteria, determined sources or identified sources for analysis, also a catalog of recommendations for at least, most common situations, also tools and methods for data collection, so that we know what it is that we are using, what kind of data we are requesting for all these checks. And in order for these results to be easy to read and systemic, we have developed templates for reports for two types of users, like I said. General numbers in the bottom of the slide depict what it is that we're checking, number of sources, number of areas we monitor. So in practice, we took two experts, a technical expert and a consultant. Each had his own role. The techie naturally was responsible for manual checks, doing, running the scripts, doing technical assessments, and drafting the observation report. And he also prioritized them by criticality. Like I said previously, the same person could also introduce some improvements on the fly if it was clear how to fix it. If it could not be fixed on the fly, he proposed his recommendations, and then the consultant would also check for proper process coverage. And would also propose his recommendations for individual processes. All this would be consolidated in the report. And the report can look like this. I hope it's readable.
Есть для технического специалиста. Тут данные, конечно, замылены, потому что там...
So naturally, the report for technical experts will provide a lot of detailed figures, and we've made it unreadable because otherwise it would be too sensitive. But you can still see that, it shows the assessment criteria, it provides prioritization, it explains what has been done and what hasn't. And these three slides, they contain the executive summary. It provides an overall assessment of the system along the 9 axes. So you will see that everything is fine in some of them, but not the others. It also proposes some rapid improvements,
и, очевидно, области для улучшений, то есть это то, что мы
and further improvement areas, things that we have not been able to do, and things that will require some executive support. And the technical aspects will be covered by my colleague here.
Коллеги, добрый день. Меня зовут Степанов Александр.
Hello, I'm Alexander Stepanov. I'm head of the Technical Solutions Department. So you may have heard about Extended Technical Support Division. This is where I work. So in SIEM Health Check, or for SIEM Health Check, we do the technical part of the operation. So let me walk you through the details of it.
Начать анализ логично с мониторинга состояния системы. Для этого
I think it makes sense for me to start the analysis with health monitoring, and for that, we already have some inbuilt functions such as health monitoring. For those who don't know the system, I should probably explain that it's a dedicated service that will monitor the state of other services. It will also monitor the state of resources the queues. It will also inform the administrator of availability of new packages. In fact, it is a helpful provider of reminders to the admin. So in the interface, you can see the green light like here, like now, or it can be yellow or red, depending on the level of threat, so to speak. And you will also see error messages if it's not green.
Возможности пост email-уведомлений, но на слайде обозначено, что они могут быть
So post and email notifications may be pulled up here, but, as the site suggests, they may fail to be configured, so to speak. And this is what a regular log would look like in health monitoring. So we started parsing it, and we found something that you probably cannot make out in my slide, so let me just read it out. Or other quotes from my memory. So we parsed the results, we produced regular expressions. We're looking for a source, and we see errors here related to various failures. Now, if you have a keen eyesight, you may have noticed that there are 186 search results, and a particular yellow mistake was discovered at 1722 and in fact resolved at 1723. It was because Elasticsearch was not really available. And this is a minor one because Elasticsearch was trying to sort of, somebody sent a bulky request and Elasticsearch did not respond in time because of that. It actually shows that, we want to see information on errors of the past 30 days. We want to see them classified by type, and we also may want to know how long it took us to respond to them. And it would be useful for us to see only the errors that took over 10 minutes to address. This is where automation comes in handy. So this is a usual regular PowerShell script. So first, we indicate depth of search, let it be 30 days. Then we set the time difference between issue discovery and issue resolution at 600 seconds. Then we indicate I want to see all errors classified by type. And the second one actually shows how many errors we had of this type. So total number of this, major errors was 57 over 30 days. 57 is not much, we can check them all. That's why next to the script, we actually generate a pretty detailed report as a CSV file. CSV is easy to transform into an Excel file. So let's see what we can actually find in a single day of hard work at SIEM. So morning starts at 5:52. When we learn that disk space is close to depletion at the core level. This is a warn level notification. We still have time to address it, to delete information unneeded. And we see that this issue was resolved within 750. So apparently, this issue is no more. Between these messages, there were alerts about some Linux agent. Now, please note that here we're getting 3 alerts per event. And in the source column, we see the ID of the agent. So we see that we have actually 2 Linux agents which experience the same issue. And the action type column shows that it was resolved and then created. And if you track it down, you'll see it was resolved again. At 8:28, fun part starts. Enricher, correlator, and Elasticsearch become unavailable. And then, queues start getting longer. Nightstock tells us that the queue limit has been reached, which means that the system has become unavailable. Next, we start running out of the core space on the disk. And by 11:08, it has become critical. No space left. At 12:37, life seems to be coming back to normal. correlator, enricher, and Elasticsearch issues have been resolved. So we see that the system has effectively been down for 4 hours.
Далее мы видим, что после того, как мы восстановили систему, мы еще обрабатывали
Next, we see that after we restore the system, well, we are still processing the data that was accumulated in the agent cache. So we see here flow controls kicking in. And this is a do that we have in order to balance the load, really. So it's effectively telling the system, it's okay, I'm managing it, I will finish soon. So between 13 and 1700, we were processing whatever there was in the cache. And the remaining errors show that the problem with the agent has not really been resolved. It's an intermittent issue or a pulsating issue. Investigation showed that these 4 hours of the system downtime were due to, well, initially agreed upon disk replacement, but the problem with the agent is for real. And indeed, at critical moments, disks in the core may experience lack of space. So this is something that needs to be addressed. I'm not going to tell you about all the aspects that we address with this system. That would actually require too much time, more than we have. But let me cover the stuff that we consider particularly important. One of this actually includes infrastructure coverage. In order to answer this question, we actually have a preliminary questionnaire, and we also interview the client about the potential data sources that need to be connected to the SIEM. And we also ask him about the scope of infrastructure, be it servers or workstations. So we have this entity called an asset. So for every server on the network, there will be an asset on SIEM. This asset is unique, which means that the number of these assets corresponds, more or less, to the amount of infrastructure covered and the amount of knowledge we have about the system. So these assets can actually be created following discovery or in pen testing exercise, or they can also be imported from other documents, such as, say, documents generated by MaxPatrol 8, or from CSV files. Next, we can check the number of groups and user filters. If we have over 1,000 assets in the system, it will be difficult for us to read the list. But we will also want to see what we have found. So this is where the function for, classifying comes in handy, because we can do domain controller grouping or classifying by Windows and Linux and so on. The more experienced you are, the more different ways of classification you can actually do.
Следующий момент — это анализ списка задач на
So next one is analysis of the task list for data scanning and collection. Actually, this list can tell you which of the sources has been connected and what it is that we are collecting and scanning, and how stable data collection is. So we may want to have, the proper schedule for data collection, and if we have identified any particular critical data sources, then certainly we shouldn't see its status in the dashboard as, completed with errors. But we can, export this data using API or otherwise and analyze it. And again, this operation can be automated. Next item is source monitoring. It sort of builds on the previous one. The idea here is that we can actually look in more detail at the critical sources, for which we will want to have alerts telling us, for example, that EBS has dropped down for a particular source, so we're not getting any events from a particular source. Another life hack, straight from the box, so to speak, is a configuration checklist. This checklist is effectively a set of checks across 3 domains, such as administration, infrastructure, and expertise, which should help the administrator learn more about the products.
Настроить максимально эффективно работу с ним.
And, configure their work in as efficient a manner as possible.
Настроен мониторинг значимых источников событий.
So I'm showing here, for example, monitoring of significant event sources. So assets need to be added to the system. This is check 1. Key elements of infrastructure need to be clearly identified. Level of criticality should be assigned. For such assets, if a given asset is a source of security events, and we're already collecting information of it, then it makes sense to set up some event monitoring for this source. And we'll also establish some alerts for EPS drops, for example. And if something goes wrong, we should be duly notified. This kind of check will not be considered passed if alerts have been set up and at the same time they are not complied with, so to speak. It's important to realize, however, that it's effectively a helper in the product setup. It should help you understand how to best do it. We will also care about the total number of critical sources identified and how you exercise controls there.
Поговорим про экспертизу, потому что, наверное, это такая больная.
Let's talk about expertise, because I think this could be a critically important subject. So this is an exploration of what we believe needs to be monitored.
Которые должны быть актуальны, изучены и настроены.
System expertise packages. So we have this UCS component of the update servers. Well, it needs to provide up-to-date expertise packages which need to be installed. Just installing them is not good enough. We also need to know what they're about, and they contain installation guidelines. When you have started them, you can perform additional actions such as, setting up table lists. You can also populate them with additional assets. For example, you can grab Sysmon or extended audit. They naturally require additional setup, additional configuration to provide reliable data. Next, we do assessment of cybersecurity events available to SIEM. Now, as many sources as you potentially have should be connected to SIEM, right? But, some of them probably will not be supported by a particular vendor. For example, you may have, some specialized industrial system which will provide very useful information. In order to connect it to SIEM, if such interface is not supported by the vendor, you may need to do some magic. For example, it may be storing information in an SQL database. Then, if you do an SQL query, you can actually pull this information to your SIEM system. Naturally, it doesn't stop there. The next step is normalization, correlation, and enrichment. The stuff coming from the vendor will not be good enough, not because the vendor is bad, but because your infrastructure will have its own peculiarities. Well, just like any infrastructure, I guess. There will be, for example, the list of AD servers. Who can do that but you? It's just a system administrator who should be able to do that. So once you've done that, you started monitoring for events, there will be some false reports, some false alerts, false positives. In order to avoid them, you will need to work on the rules. Going back to my previous example, if you want to see incidents occurring on your peculiar system, you will need to configure special rules, and that also requires some expertise. Now we will see if we can actually help you in this particular respect when it comes, for example, to your diagnostics monitoring or control system. And we've got our own courses for interested clients, and we can also help you with the writing, normalization, and correlation rules. It best works when the client really wants it. Next step is about assuring the quality of data you collect and process. We may have, say, EBS of 30,000, but how many of these events actually matter for analysis? So, the normalization percentage is an important criterion here. We should strive for 70%, and if we don't get there, we need to analyze the discrepancies. Collecting a lot of traffic and doing nothing about it makes little sense. Working with PDQL filters of assets and events, I think this really shows the amount of expertise we have, right? If indeed you have 30,000 events per second, you will need to know a lot about filtration. And different companies have different sets of tools and different methods for identifying attacks, for example. Finally, you will need a decent process for incident response. Actually, when we're talking incidents here, we're assuming that an incident is a potentially bad event. If we do not respond to something that's potentially bad, that paints us in a pretty dreary light. False positives also need to be addressed, and detection of new techniques and tactics of attacks is also a must-have function for every SOC.
На примере поподробнее про ложные срабатывания, анализ правил корреляции.
This one is about false positives and analysis of correlation rules.
На самом деле, любой желающий.
What are we focusing on? And I think everybody can do it if they have a SIEM. In the statistics tab, like this, we will be looking at, for example, these lines. Here we see that 2 rules have been triggered 7,000 and 27,000 times in a day, which is a bit too much. We actually believe that if a rule is triggered over 4,000 times per day, well, this certainly warrants analyzing them for false positives and for integrity of the rules. The second thing that actually draws our attention is suspended correlation rules. We see that 4 rules have been suspended. The big question is how long they've been like this. This is something that the monitoring section should show. If they have been stopped for a day and the administrator is not doing anything, this triggers a bunch of questions for the admin. Actually, this whole system was designed to help us better deal with false positives. Now, we do have a system called Correlation Rule Performance Monitoring. And this system actually suggests that, something may be wrong with your correlation rule here. Would you like to check it and change it? And, some administrators, may feel lazy and they will just switch it off. And we actually don't think it's a good idea. So the criterion here is that it has to be on, and suspended correlation rules, should be reacted to, should be responded to, and all rules that get triggered over 4,000 times a day should be thoroughly analyzed. And finally, we will be looking at correlator and enricher logs for errors.
иногда кода или попытка вставки.
And we may find there, say, elements of code or attempts at insertion in the table list. So, for example, a string being inserted in an int type column would certainly generate an error.
Так, к вопросам архитектуры и масштабирования начать, наверное,
Now, as regards architecture and scaling, I think we should start with APS analysis, as well as monitoring of the way that event flow gets processed. So, shown here is a sample chart showing data collection statistics.
Это OPSEC, syslog и WinMontLog.
So you see OPSEC, syslog, the orange line here is the aggregate for all modules. So we can see that until 8 a.m. the system was up and running. Then we had 4-hour-long downtime. And after that, the system was actively addressing the tasks in the cache. It's interesting how the system worked in this stress mode. So naturally, there is some flow control that smooths these charts. And we can see that at 18:30, syslog and WinEventLog started going down, while another log started going up. It probably shows that the traffic of syslog is much lighter. So it shows that resources available to syslog provided higher performance effectively, and this is when EPS shot above 30,000. It also shows that, making judgment calls on simplistic criteria such as EPS would be poor practice. We certainly need to analyze the composition of the traffic. Let's continue this discussion of architecture and performance analysis. So we will be checking here EPS flow and agent level load. Now that we're looking at agents, we also need to check their caches. You will probably know that we have data cache in SQL, which can grow. So we will need to check the file size in the private folder, and then we can create filters linked to file names, and then we can see if, say, events from a particular source will be falling behind the actual time of events. For example, we may realize that we have too strong a flow of events from a particular module, or maybe the configuration of the module is suboptimal and needs to be revisited. Next one is configuration and load management at CPU, RAM, and disk level. So naturally, we will check here if it's in line with minimum hardware requirements. We'll also check if it is working fine. We'll also be checking for loads. It's actually a sizable item because we'll also be looking at the configuration of logical drives and the stuff you have in the system. And if the system of monitoring is properly configured, we can also do retrospective analysis. And there we can also check if there have been any data leaks, for example, and how the system performed in a stress mode when, for example, a particular source started spamming us with information. And with this data, we will be looking for bottlenecks in our architecture and in our performance. Next item is configuration files. And this one deals with bottlenecks and tuning. So we've got configuration files, and they contain default values. We can actually overclock the system, but if we change these values, but we need to be careful when doing that. So it's also a way of improving the operation of the product. Next one is asset processing statistics. Now, this feature is available starting from release 24, and it shows how we are processing data on discovered assets and if we have any performance issues. Well, say we've done substantial analysis on the network. Naturally, this means we'll need a lot of time to process it, and then we should be able to assess the speed and results. I will speed up. Next one is size of Postgres bases and availability of backup copies. So if a database is over 150 gigabytes, well, naturally, we will need to do something about it and also check for errors. And also we need to check for a backup copies because, still we need to do core backups at least once a month. Next one is checking Elasticsearch index and size of the daily index. So the big question here is how much we're storing in Elastic and how much we want to store in Elasticsearch. The cool data, for example, data over 90 days. Data like this is usually relevant for analysis purposes. Most business users, you'll want to compare what you're having today to what you had a week ago or a month ago, but 90 days old information is rarely relevant, so you should go to an archive. So this is where you would also want to check how your archiving processes work, how they're configured. And you can also see here what's capacity is still available in the system. This is it for the technical part. Let me tell you about what we're working on right now. We are trying to increase the automation level of our checks, whereas scaling our methods and assessments for other products. We're also doing analysis of comprehensive solutions, and we're also doing assessment of the performance of the system as part of expert services, and we're expanding the support providers. Thank you very much. Let me take your questions now. Over there. Thank you very much for your report. What's the minimal size or what's the minimal number of sources? And what kind of minimum requirements do they need to meet in order for the system to make sense?
What do
you mean make sense? Well, in order for event correlations to work, in order for me to be able to prove its value to business, what do I need? Well, WinEventLog, Syslog, Kaspersky would be most popular sources. We actually have a reference guide which lists all the data sources that we support. You know what our customers do? They check this reference document, compare it to what they have, and they start connecting them one by one in the order of decreasing importance. But it all really starts with your interest as a client. What is it you want to monitor and defend? Let me build on this answer. Well, we need to have a proper understanding of the whole infrastructure in the system, which means that all these sources should be available as assets. And just like Alexander said, depending on the criticality of the system, be it, say, domain controllers or business systems or DBMSs or what have you. So depending on their criticality, you will want to monitor them and collect events and analyze them. That is, we connect everything we've got, the more the better, and then we check if it is statistically significant and valid. Yes, that's one of the ways of putting it. Who's next? Thank you for the report. You have mentioned several areas, I think 9, that you inspect, including architecture. So in hierarchical installations, will the health check work on all subordinate installations or just the parental one? I think we're checking all the servers, but I will be corrected if I get it wrong. So the whole installation, even if it is hierarchical, it does make sense to start with the parental site or a particular branch, and there you will see, you will decide which pain points you have and whether it makes sense for you. And if it does, you will continue and increase the scope. You've mentioned that you will be checking RabbitMQ queues. Is this an active check? And will then a health check go to RabbitMQ with some credentials, or will it be simply reading the log? Let me explain where I'm coming from with this question. If we, say, change the standard passwords on RabbitMQ, will it be unavailable to health check? It won't. We do not check the Rabbit queue. SIEM has got a special service for doing that. And we will be looking at the alerts from individual queues. If we want to check it, we'll ask you for a password and we'll go deep into it. But in fact, we are more interested in the config file. See what kind of limits you have there for queues, how memory is configured, and that should be enough. Thank you. Good afternoon, it's a good evening, good night, for God's sake. Thank you very much. I'm working so much with SIEMs. I have several questions. I may have missed it in your report. Is that a standalone product, or will it be part of the box, off-the-shelf solution? Like I said, all these tools are available in the off-the-shelf solution. Or let me put it differently. All these functions are available separately, and we've been talking about, this health monitoring thing as an extra service from the technical support team. So just talk to your manager. We'll be happy to tell you more. So all these things, they represent our internal expertise. Having these tools is one thing, interpreting it properly is different. And going to a higher level of abstraction as the need might be. I may have missed it. Do you do inspection of correlation rules if they were developed by the users? And they may be, for example, in conflict with the current configurations for individual data sources. So I'm particularly interested in user-generated rules. Alexander? Correlations and normalizations. Now, we will be looking for errors around rules as, like in general. If you have some specific concerns, if you are not sure, for example, if you got this rule right, we can talk about it. It's not that we will be analyzing all your rules. You know what? Many clients will not want to share their expertise like this, and that would be a colossal amount of work for us as well. So, when will it be done? You mean when conflicts arise? Yes. And what if these conflicts are sort of latent? During installation, they were not easy to see, but maybe later. Well, there is an inbuilt mechanism for a conflict check that should show things like this. Obviously, as far as the system is concerned, you should not be able to create in parallel two conflicting rules. But it can happen in real life. I mean, in corner cases, so to speak. In other words, it's a way of packaging the existing functions. And it's like a checklist on the main page of version 10, right? Or does it have like expanded functionality? Does it make sense, in other words, for me to talk to my managers?
целом, что это такое, да, вы сейчас спросили,
Ну, да,
получается, да?
So you've effectively asked me about this system.
Функционал просто в форме
Yes, is that a different way of packaging the functions that, have been around for some
Что на
time?
самом деле, как, наверное, предыстория
Let me give you this answer.
всей истории в том, что у нас был уже некий базис там health-чеков в рамках расширенной поддержки, когда мы
As part of extended support, we have been offering some like health check, where we would, check the architecture and check the performance of the
с
system.
точки зрения работы
And
продукта,
we try to make sure that everything is fine, at least from the viewpoint of the way the system is running. Now we realize this is not enough. We realize that expertise also needs to be inspected. And this requires more profound dialogue, so to speak. It requires many more interviews. It may well show, for example, that the client has only connected half of sources available. And if expertise is lacking, let's talk more. Or maybe the administrator doesn't have the time. Maybe he's like the only person there. And then we should be able to help the administrator. So our objective here is to identify helpfully more issues for you and propose solutions. So the administrator using this product will collect information that will go to you for additional analysis, and you will provide additional recommendations, or is it more sort of private? So you will be sort of seeing all this stuff, right? That, client with this license has this and that. You know what? It should be initiated by the client. The client needs to want to do that, needs to want to learn if he is using this product the right way. But he's doing this analysis. We are doing this analysis. Okay. And we will be involving your administrator for that. All the technical checks we will do on our own, but the rest, for that we will need your admin. And this 120 checks that we mentioned earlier today, well, at least we told you about the structure. So we run this 120 checks, and then we process all the information received this way. And this is where, besides our techies, we also engage our experts. So, for example, around bugs, we will involve our developers. We will be asking them what could be potentially wrong with this data processing. And we'll also be talking to developers about, say, additional features. So it's a pretty good way of, doing a summary of the current state, so to speak, of our system on your, or like your instance of our system. I guess that's the gist of it. Yes, I was about to say pretty much the same thing, that we bring a whole team to you. So it's not that, we bring you a disk and we tell you, do whatever you like about it. We come with the expertise. Thank you. I'm here. To your right.
Больше разобраться в терминологии, потому что, насколько мне известно,
It's a terminology question, I guess.
10 целый ряд продуктов, кроме SIEM, это как минимум на ты VM.
I understand that MaxPatrol has VM, not just SIEM, right? So this health check you've been talking about, is it only available to SIEM customers, or? Alexander touched upon it briefly. We are planning to expand it, which means that it will be made available to AV and VM eventually. I'm sorry, in the short term, it's currently only available to SIEM, and naturally, we want to cover all the bundles, and we're not going to, do it separately for SIEM and VM. We want to cover the whole gamut. Thank you for your report. I want to go back to the slide here where you parsed the log of health monitor, if I remember it correctly. What kind of tools do you use for log parsing?
Какой именно? Потому что это тоже результат парсинга.
Нет, предыдущий.
Which one? The previous one.
от этого как вы пришли к той табличке?
So how did you get that table
Инструментов.
Это
from that log? Well, this is PowerShell.
Нет, предыдущий слайд, предыдущий. Да.
No, I'm talking about the previous slide.
Да, вот с
Health
помощью каких
monitoring.
инструментов
This is
вы
the log.
парсите этот лог?
Okay, and what tools do you use to parse this log? It's all done with a single PowerShell script. We take health monitoring log and log 1 in order to, cover 30 days or 90 days, whatever the scope is. And then we parse it with PowerShell.
Условно говоря, на слова error и warning.
So you're effectively parsing by warning and error keywords. No, actually, there is this regular expression issue dot asterisk. And this one, for example, oh, I should have actually covered it. What are the goodies to be found here? We have error type, error ID, name of component, see off type here, flow queue space, error, SIEM, blah, 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 error. All the stuff you can see here. I'm sorry you can not probably read it.
Ну, не страшно, просто смотрите.
Or maybe you can.
Если вы ориентируетесь
I'm really scared. Let me double check something.
то, условно говоря,
If you are looking for regular expressions,
банально может быть опечатка в каком-то слове, да?
what if there is a typo in a particular word in a log?
В логе эту опечатку поправили, и, соответственно, что-то может пролететь мимо. То есть я просто к чему?
Then you will obviously miss it, right?
Отчасти напомнило работу
This
нормализатора.
stuff makes me think of normalizers in SIEMs, with normalization rules and stuff.
Не думали в эту сторону?
Have you thought about that?
Про лог отвечу, то, что
Let me answer the part of your question about logs. Logs are produced by code, so I'm not really sure what kind of typo can happen there. A software developer responsible for the logging process. What if he makes a typo in a word? He then notices it, he corrects it, and then search by regular expressions will no longer see it. No, we are talking here about a limited number of error types, and they're all covered with our checks. The total is like 50 types of errors. For example, excess of RabbitMQ limit, or waiting time reached a threshold, or an agent going offline, or a service going offline. Queue space error.
Там у нас много метрик есть по размеру, очереди в гигабайтах есть.
So it can be, the size of queue in gigabytes, or it could be size of queue in events. Waiting time for a particular component has exceeded the threshold. So we are talking here about specific checks which are hard-coded and they do not contain errors, otherwise we would have known about them and would have addressed them. So I guess this comparison is not really valid, your comparison to normalizer. If you want, we can take this discussion offline. Thank you.
Коллеги, разрешите вопрос?
May I?
Да. Коллеги, добрый...
Можно еще...
Ну, давайте пару последних вопросов.
Let's take 2 more questions, okay?
Текущий SIEM был представлено ваше решение, то какое количество специалистов, какие сроки необходимы для миграции? И
How many people do we need to migrate from a different SIEM system to your SIEM system? And will we be able to migrate the rules that were developed for this other SIEM system? And how much time do your people need to spend on the system if we cannot give you, say, remote access? So you mean you have your SIEM in place? Yes. And if we need to migrate to your system, for example? The best thing you can do is talk to our managers. I'm sorry about that. It's a technical question, isn't it? Like, do you provide training?
Опять же, сколько для этого нужно единиц и трудозатраты?
Like, how much time will it require? Well, you're asking me how many people will be required for migration. That will really depend on the size and the time you would want to do it in, right? Maybe you can do it, with the help of a single person. That should be a Superman. I'm sorry, but we will need, for this discussion, we'll need the specific figures. And my problem is that, I won't even be able to give you an answer even if I see your numbers. Please talk to our managers. They will be happy to help you. Okay, thank you.
Коллеги, разрешите вопрос все же задать?
I have a question. May I finally ask it?
Ну,
Sure.
Благодаря предыдущим коллегам на часть вопросов я
Thanks to
ответ, в принципе, получил, но
some of the
все-таки
previous askers, I have a portion of my answer already.
это
And
продукт или
still,
услуга.
is it a product or a service? Would you like to answer this one?
Да, это, на самом деле
I should try.
получается, наверное, что это и продукт, и услуга, да?
It's both.
Можно
It's a
так говорить,
product
потому
and a
что
service.
есть, несколько каналов распространения, грубо говоря.
And there are, in fact, several distribution channels, shall I say. You can indeed get it as extended tech support.
Да, вот сейчас там наши коллеги это прорабатывают, потому что...
And our colleagues are looking right now at how to promote it otherwise, because it's a new product.
К менеджеру обратиться, мы тут больше хотели...
I think it's best that you talk to the managers, really. We wanted to cover the technical elements. And my question will be technical. It's just a principal question, I think.
Если это
Look here.
часть услуги, то
If it's a service,
утилита для разового запуска или
is it a one-off utility?
вводится в эксплуатацию и также параллельно с SIEM стоит
Or you sort of introduce it and it will be working in parallel to CM and will be giving us, traffic light indication?
По-другому работает. Действительно, приезжают наши специалисты.
Not really.
смотрят
The way it works is that our people will arrive, they will check your system together with your people. We will launch automation scripts. We will also do manual checks. We will be asking you for additional information and architecture, data sources, and so on and so forth. And we provide you with our recommendations within a week.
Не очень правильно проводить один раз, потому что
I think that doing it only once makes little sense, because I'm not sure we will be able to fix all your issues that fast.
по результатам найденных недоработок.
So I would propose that, on the basis of the issues with architecture and whatever, you develop a roadmap, you address it with some projects over time.
Нравится результат, по идее он вам
And if you like the result,
вот, то вы
and we hope you will,
время, скорее всего через год,
you will sometime later say in a year, invite us again, to assess the delta, to assess the improvement.
проверить какие-то моменты сами. Потому что
Or you may choose to run a similar test, a similar audit yourselves, because all the tools are available. It's just, orchestrating them, which may be difficult. Yeah, right. And I would guess it should be done much earlier than in a year.
Там было упомянуто
Technical question.
контроле количества, размера индексов.
You mentioned index size control.
Про нее чуть подробнее. Вообще,
Would you like to give us additional details on that?
кроме вот этих параметров, размеров.
And besides these parameters, such as index size, what else is being checked with respect to Elasticsearch, and what are your other recommendations there? Let's start with indexes, okay?
В чем сложность вообще всей этой истории? В том, что
What makes it all difficult is that it really depends on the size of your infrastructure and type of installation. If we stick to the guides, we currently have like 4 types of infrastructure. Regular loads, high loads, super high loads, extra high loads. So there will be policies there like hot data, warm data, cold data, and migration policies migration policies.
Если у вас сверхнагруженная система, то мы идем смотреть.
If you have a super high load system, we will be checking your policies for sure. And I cannot give you any guidance here in terms of number of indexes and index sizes because data distribution principles there will be different. Also, there is a significant change between releases. Release 25 is planned for, relatively soon died. And there are also like Elasticsearch differences.
Поэтому смотрим мы однозначно на объемы, на то вообще, насколько система.
So we will care about volumes for sure and the ability of your system to manage this flow. Do you have capacity, extra capacity or not? Next, we'll be checking if Elasticsearch is stable. Does it go into the red zone or it doesn't? And if it does, why? Previously, for example, there was this issue with out-of-memory errors. Like in 1.7, it was quite prevalent. In 7.4, it was intermittent. In 7.9, it rarely ever surfaces. It does, but it's indeed a very rare occasion. So stability is an important concern to us. Thank you. I've got more. Now, among your criteria, do you have control of or monitoring of cluster installations such as Elasticsearch and Postgre? Non-hierarchical, you mean? You mean, say, having a database in the cluster? I'm talking about cluster stability. Well, if you have fault-resistant installations, they need to be inspected for sure. So in this automated utility, will it do that? Will it pass the verdict? Automated checks are all very well, and we automate as much as we can. But the scenario you have described, this is something that will be checked manually. Failing to check a database and its stability and reliability would undermine the quality of our audit. We'll certainly do that. Officially, we do not support Postgres clusterization. So we will need to see who structured it. We'll need to talk to that person. So it will be a manual exercise.
И в заключение вопрос,
The final one, then.
Метрики,
Are there any metrics
которые бы вы рекомендовали
or indicators you would recommend
в режиме онлайн? Какой-то
to
расширенный
control for online? Having an expanded
баз данных, которые используют.
traffic light system, particularly for databases.
Шаблоны для Zabbix,
Maybe some templates for Zymex or set of metrics we would want to check online. Everything we want to have in the traffic light, we will put in the traffic light, such as database monitoring. Like I said, if the database exceeds 150 gigabytes, you need to consider vacuum and reasons for its, overblown size. So you may want to build alerts and whatever. It's not available off the box, off the shelf right now, but we have added some simple scripts that do this kind of checks and that will tell you the size of each database. Understood. Thank you.
Коллеги, тогда спасибо большое за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention, dear colleagues. If you still have outstanding questions and your current client, please talk to your managers. They will be happy to give you additional information and we'll be happy to get in touch with you as a technical support team.